Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Marco Mantovani, and I'm a PhD student here at the Conservatory. And I will present today a lecture about the piece I'm going to perform this evening, Schumann's Davidsbündlertänze. And I will focus on what I believe are the two main sources of inspiration for this piece, Clara and Schubert. The Fantasie and the Davidsbündlertänze were composed in the same years during an important moment in Schumann's personal life. As we saw, the first movement of the Fantasie was meant to be a deep lamentation for Clara during their long separation. On the contrary, the Davidsbündlertänze will flourish from their reunion and reconciliation. Indeed, Schumann starts to compose the piece in August 1837, right after their second declaration of love. He writes to her, "Here are many wedding thoughts in the dances. They arose in the most beautiful state of excitement I can even recall." The dances are inextricably linked with the image of Clara, as it happens for the Fantasie and for many other works composed by Schumann. Some people even say every piece. But however, I believe that the nature of these two works in particular has a very profound connection with Schumann's biography and with the different stages of their love story. I usually don't like giving too much importance to biographical aspects in order to interpret musical works. Quoting Leonard Bernstein, there is a popular myth that composers write the way they feel at the moment of their writing, which is simply not true. For example, Tchaikovsky wrote his Pathetic Symphony when he was suicidal. Not at all. You cannot write if you are suicidal. You just stay in bed, depressed. You don't write music. Which is, by the way, the same reason why I don't accept the idea that Schumann was writing in maniac states, or that his last compositions, which represent some of the most sublime examples of his genius, were written by a man who was going mad. However, in the case of these two specific pieces, so the Davidsbündlertänze and the Fantasie, it is just too tempting to picture him writing music as he was writing in his personal journal. So a little bit of a context. After their first declaration of love in December 1835, Wieck father, furious, sends Clara from Leipzig to Dresden to separate them. And from March on, he even forbids Robert and Clara to exchange letters. And so they couldn't have any contact of any kind with each other until the summer of 1837, which means a year and a half later. So the first movement of the Fantasie was born in the middle of this context, and Schumann himself defines it as perhaps the most impassioned music I have ever written. And after this long period of separation, the severe control of Wieck father wakens, and the two lovers, with the help of a trusted housekeeper, which seems a little bit like beautiful, can come close again, and they realize that their love is still intact. So in August 1837, they declare a second union. And on the 20th of the same month, according to his diary, Schumann starts composing the Davidsbündlertänze. It is a period of exaltation, quite comprehensible in the light of the context, full of wedding thoughts. In a letter to Clara, Robert explains the whole story is a Polterabend. A Polterabend is a sort of bachelor party typical of the German tradition, where family and friends bring pottery, so plates, cups, and smash it in front of the door of the bride's house in order to bring good luck. And it is clear that Clara was one of the main sources of inspiration during the creative process of the work. And also Brahms had the same opinion, saying, "I too gaze even more deeply into a pair of wondrously beautiful eyes, which gaze at me now from out of the Davidsbündlertänze and the Kreiseriana." No doubt those eyes were Clara's eyes. So the dances hide many secret messages to her, mainly by quoting some of her compositions. This is a very common device that Opus 6 shares with many other works by Schumann, as the opening of the Fantasie, for example, where the theme comes from a piece by Clara, and a turno by Clara. But what is quite unusual is the fact that Schumann himself unveils one of the quotes. So if we see the beginning of the first piece, the first two bars are indeed underlined and headed Motto von CW, so Clara Wieck. And this motto, which sounds like this, comes from the opening bars of the mazurka in G major from Soirée musicale opus 6 by Clara. And the fact that Schumann insisted in publishing his Davidsbündlertänze under the same opus number, despite the fact that chronologically they come after Fantasiestücke opus 12, is again a very obvious indication of his reference. This motto never comes back in its original form in the rest of the piece, but somehow it shapes the main motives. So the falling second, this appoggiatura, and mainly this mira, will represent a main characteristic. And in the last piece, which is by the way the only other mazurka present in the cycle, we'll find an extended use of this falling second, almost reaching paroxysm. So in the part marked mezzo forte, and again, and so on. In the first edition, Schumann inscribes on top of this last piece the following statement: Eusebius added the following needlessly, but at the same time his eyes told of much bliss. But this last piece is hardly a needless afterthought. It represents indeed the emotional peak of the whole cycle. So I believe here Schumann makes use of the well-known romantic irony, trying to underscore the revelatory character of this piece and to distance from the moment of supreme bliss. And this attitude might be enlightened as well by the old saying inscribed at the beginning of the Davidsbündlertänze, which goes, in each and every age, joy and sorrow are mingled. Be steadfast in your joy, courageous in your sorrow. Another homage to Clara, this last dance by Eusebius and the piece number 9, written by Florestan, are the only ones in C major. And so in the context of a piece that starts in G major and whose main tonal center is B minor, clearly the reason of C major is again a reference to Clara, being the initial C of her name a musical letter. And again, in dance number 15, we might find another allusion to Clara's Soirée musicale, not the mazurka this time, but the notturno. So the dance I'm referring to goes like this. And Clara's notturno opens like this. And so you might have recognized this theme, since it's the very same theme of the opening of the fantasy. And similarly, a transposed version of this theme is the Stimme aus der Ferne, a voice from afar, of the last novelette, opus 21. But this dance might allude, I think, as well to Clara's piece, even if not quoting it literally as in the other cases, because of the descending theme and a somewhat nocturne-like quality that reminds us the Chopin of the Carnival. I don't want to bore you with a complete list of references, but let's just take a look to a last example, which I have the impression plays a fundamental role in the structure of the cycle. So this comes from Clara Wieck's Valse romantique, opus 4, which, after a brief introduction, has this theme, which you might have heard already, since it was quoted already in Schumann's Carnival in the Valse allemande. And in the Davidsbündlertänze, Schumann reduces Clara's theme to this motive, which is the one in the upper left, which is composed by two parts. So I had the three F sharps and the tail, the descending line. And we'll see how these three repeated F sharps seem to have quite an importance in the structure of the piece. But let's go in order. So this motive appears for the first time in the third piece, twice. So at the beginning of the piece, and so on. And at the end, so appearing again in the left hand and then taken from the right hand. Etc. And it appears in number 4, only the head this time, so the three F sharps hidden in the syncopations of the right hand. And then upper voice. And left hand. And again. And so on. So the whole piece is actually made up on this motive. Then in number 11, this time the tail of the theme, so the descending line starting from the F sharp. A bit longer descending line. And as well in number 2. But mainly, this motive comes back again in the magical transition called trio that leads to the penultimate piece, the Via aus der Ferne, from afar. And so in a completely different context, the theme, the motive appears again, and it's somehow a little bit developed. And then finally, during a descent to the lower register of the piano, it stops on a syncopated F sharp pedal, which will be the pedal that gently sustains the extremely delicate page of the Via aus der Ferne. And so on. So Clara's motive becomes softer and softer as an image that at first is present and concrete, but whose contours become blurred and more distant. We have abandoned the Polterabend, the party. Maybe because this idée fixe, the three F sharps, has made us remember something long forgotten. And indeed, after floating on syncopations, we are unexpectedly back on a melancholic valse that we know already, since it's the second piece of the cycle. So this sequence of recollections, Clara's valse romantique, then the motive that Schumann deduces from this theme, then the head of the motive, the repeated F sharp, then the Via aus der Ferne, and finally the recollection of the second dance, resembles to a process of remembrance that goes deeper and deeper. The parallel with the Proust Mémoire involontaire seems to me quite accurate. So something experienced in the present, the taste of La Madeleine, is the catalyst of an involuntary recollection of scenes from the past. The miracle de l'analogie is here generated by the F sharp, which is itself already a reminiscence of Clara's motive. Schumann had a great predecessor who had as well this particular taste for pastness, Schubert. And the unconditioned love for Schubert's music and its importance for Schumann's own production is well known. Skimming through Schumann's writings, we can find many passages referring to some of Schubert's pieces as, I quote, a gentle reflection on lived experience, speaking about the Adagio of the Wanderer Fantasie. And again, Schumann equated the Sehnsucht Walzer with the memories of lost youth and the thousand loves. This pastness quality that clearly Schumann attributed to some of Schubert's compositions becomes even more evident in the critique to the Impromptu, opus 142. And writing about the first Impromptu, Schumann says, "The whole movement was conceived in an hour of suffering, as if musing on the past." So the description of this music as a rumination on the past unveils a characteristic aspect of Schubert, its richness in musical ideas that are imbued with the quality of reminiscence already on their first appearance. And we can find an evidence of this, I believe, in the sublime page of the middle section of the first Impromptu, which after a short transition falls into this incredible page. So a brief transition, a descending arpeggio in A-flat major, leads to the middle section of the piece. And here I believe we can clearly see the musing on the past. Indeed, in this page we seem to be removed from temporal present and quickly taken into a realm summoned up from the recess of our memory. The arpeggios of the accompaniment are described by Schumann as a delicate, fantastic embroidery, and displays the downbeat, creating a mild but perceptible metric dissonance that envelops the two voices. And that this texture, as well as the shift from major to minor, seems to intensify the motion from one temporal level to another, and therefore helps to create the reminiscence quality of this music. Let me just play again the beginning, this transition. I suspect that the aura of pastness that Schumann felt in this Impromptu and in other compositions by Schubert might have inspired him in multiple occasions. Just sticking to compositions from the same period of the Davidsbündlertänze, the Im Legendenton from the first movement of the Fantasie has a very similar effect, since it takes the listener far away from the passionate surrounding music. And similarly, the flow of the last novelette is interrupted by a Stimme aus der Ferne, a voice from afar. Nonetheless, I find the effect of the finale of the Davidsbündlertänze even more incredible. Here Schumann brilliantly recreates the effect of a chain of involuntary recollections from the past. So, in the middle of a dance in a good humor mood, mit guten Humor, a sequence of distant memories flash back closely. So Clara's motive appears again. And from here, to the memory of the melancholic, perhaps painful, Valse in B minor. Another reason to believe to a supposed influence of Schubert in the creative process of the Davidsbündlertänze is the choice of the genre, dances. Schubert has been undoubtedly the most prolific composer of dances for piano, mainly valses, German dances, Ländler and Écossaise. And Schumann discovered Schubert's music for the first time when he was 17, actually by playing dances and for hands in musical soirées, and he was immediately shocked. Dance music definitely plays an important role in Schumann's early piano compositions. The Papillon, Intermezzi Opus 4, Carnaval are all in the form of dance suites, as the Davidsbündlertänze, and they are thoroughly informed by the spirit of dance, even if obviously they are more complex in structure and content than just a collection of dances. The Davidsbündlertänze not only have the word dance, Tanze, in the title of the first edition, they were also described by Schumann as a wedding party, the Polterabend, leaving to Clara to, I quote, imagine the beginning and the end. This beginning and end could lie somewhere out of the piece, but they could be integrated as well in it. And for example, the real bachelor party could only start with the dance number 3, which is a piece that sounds almost as a new beginning and which opens with the most clear reference to the motto. So if the motto was this, then the third piece starts. And Clara's motive. And so on. And clearly the end would be then the Wie aus der Ferne. And that way, so we could have the whole Polterabend would start with the theme of Clara and finish with the recollection of the same theme. Very similar to the Carnival in the structure, they are quite different in content. To quote Schumann again, he says, I think they, so the Davidsbündlertänze, are quite different from Carnival, and are to the latter as faces are to masks. And here the faces might be the blissful ones of the Davidsbündler participating to the wedding of Robert and Clara. During the preparation of this lecture, and to try to explain the relation that I feel intuitively between this work in particular and Schubert, I went back to read some of the articles that Schumann wrote about his beloved Schubert on his musical magazine. And among the more famous critics of on the symphony, The Great, or on the Impromptu that we just discussed, I came across an article dealing with dance music written for the piano. So first of all, I wanted to show you how a front page of Schumann's Neue Zeitschrift für Musik looked like. So this is number 16 of the year 1836, which appeared on the 23rd of February. All the numbers of the magazine were composed by only 4 pages, so a very thin journal. And the last article, in the last page, is entitled Tanz, usually translated in literature of dancing, and is not signed by a character in particular, Florestan or Eusebius, for example, but just with a generic from the books of the Davidsbund. Schumann, who was as well a very gifted writer, draws the picture of an imaginary soirée of the Davidsbündler. And starting in medias res, Florestan is apparently melancholic and asks Zelia, which is one of the nicknames for Clara, to play some dance music, which, he says, makes me sad instead of cheerful and busy. Zelia starts then to play a few dances from different composers, Kessler, Meyer, as well as Clara's own Valse romantique that we saw already. And her playing is accompanied by comments of the Davidsbündler, mainly Florestan and Eusebius. Eusebius also sits at the piano and plays Thalberg's dances. Other characters are participating at the soirée. Serpentin, pseudonym of Karl Bank, the deaf painter Fritz Friedrich, and Wald, who's probably the same well-known character from Jean-Paul's Flegeliare and the only imaginary character. At the end, Zelia, Clara, plays Schubert's German Dances Opus 33. And here, Florestan Schumann does something that I find fascinating. He comments poetically on every dance, catching in a few words the spirit of every piece. Of course, it is a very personal look and you might not agree with him, but I find it very interesting to try to recreate the same situation with you. So I will now play Schubert's dances, and at the same time, I will project for every dance Florestan's comment. So if someone can turn off the light, please.
But in the middle of the waltz, Florestan sprang from the table to the door. They knew what he meant by it, so Celia ceased playing, and the others separated. Florestan is in the habit of breaking off at the moment of the highest enjoyment, perhaps to embalm it in memory, in its full freshness and completeness. This time he succeeded, for when the friends talked of their merriest evening, it is to recall the 28th of December, 18.